We're talking NFL draft as we have been every day here in April on the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, a draft mailbag, questions about generational prospects concerning trends in the NFL draft, and a whole lot more coming at you right now.
NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson bring you expert NFL analysis every day in less than 30 minutes. Get an inside look into the NFL on the field and in the front office. With elite breakdowns, next-level analysis, and in-depth information only for the real NFL fans. This is Peacock and Williamson, and it starts now.
Welcome to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show. Brian Peacock alongside Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. And a lot of the everydayers getting involved with our mailbag today. Seeing a ton of questions. A lot of them come from the comments on YouTube and our Twitter handles at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL. Get those in whenever you would like. Before we get to those questions, though, an NFL legend, OJ Simpson, has passed away today, Matt, at the age of 76 after a battle with cancer. OJ Simpson's playing days were before my time. I remember a white Bronco. I remember Naked Gun. I don't remember him as a football player, but I see his statistics in the record books, and they're unbelievable.
Yeah, I want to spend a little time with it. Obviously, all the off-the-field stuff we know. I mean, he's going to go down as a historical figure, football aside. I mean, mostly for bad stuff. And frankly, he was a huge icon when I was a kid. I was born in 1973, so he was basically done playing when I knew anything. But recently, but you would see him on Hertz commercials. And frankly, at that point, you didn't see very many African-American men on TV, period, let alone as sponsors, So he was revolutionary in that regard before becoming infamous. But I want to talk about him as a player. I want to spend a couple of minutes because I've said this. I've been doing this a long time, and I don't remember if it overlapped before his, incidents or not. But I've said for years that I'm only talking football here, folks, that Earl Campbell and OJ Simpson to me are maybe the two most underrated Hall of Fame type running backs ever. And here's why on juice. I mean, he was way ahead of his time as a pass catcher. I mean, he's catching balls 20, 30 yards downfield like a wide receiver. He was on a horrendous football team. I mean, no one even remembers who his quarterbacks were in Buffalo. I mean, it was 11-man boxes in the snow, terrible weather, no passing game whatsoever. And I think he was easily the best offensive player of the 70s in the entire league. And trust me, some people here in Pittsburgh might burn my house down when I say that. And he might even been the best football player of the 70s, including Joe Green and Mel Blount, folks. I mean, I'm as impartial as I possibly could be. And here's an amazing accomplishment. And first off, I mean, I urge you just as a football fan to go watch his highlights at USC and with the Bills, not with the Niners. Those last 2 years of your Niners were terrible. One of the worst trades in history.
Yeah, they tried to. He was a born and raised Bay Area guy. They tried to bring him back home, but he was done. He was done as a player, so not a great trade there. Much better playing career before he came back to the 49ers.
Yes. And again, a tremendous, from 69 to 77, he was a Bill. I just wanted to pull up his stats and make sure I got the year right. But the year I was born, it was 1973, is one of the most amazing feats in NFL history that I just think people should know as NFL historians. So he led the league in touches. He averaged 6 yards a carry against basically 15-man boxes with no passing game whatsoever, and rushed for over 2,000 yards. That's unbelievable. But it was in 14 games.
Yeah.
He averaged 143 yards a game on the ground when everyone on the planet knew he was getting the ball. I mean, it was a phenomenal football player. He's never mentioned with Walter Payton, but he should be.
It was such a different game. Like OJ Simpson now, and you talk about Earl Campbell, OJ Simpson, I think it's the same story. A lot of these players, Jim Brown, maybe even how big they were. They wouldn't even,
it's amazing.
They'd be defensive ends. They wouldn't even be running backs. Like they wouldn't even go into that position group probably. Like you hear a lot about guys who are defensive ends in college. Like, oh, you should watch his running back tape in high school. He was a big running back. You know, defensive tackles that were 250-pound running backs in high school ended up being 300-pound defensive tackles. I think that's what OJ Simpson would end up being. He'd be a pass rusher. He'd be more Micah Parsons than maybe you get a Derrick Henry here and there, but
here and there, right.
It's just such a different game.
So I'm often asked about all-time greats, and to me, I always use the Babe Ruth comparison, is it all depends. How good were you versus the people you played against? Not, like Jack Ham's one of the best linebackers ever. I love him. I mean, my son's got a Jack Ham jersey. He couldn't play today. Like there's no chance. He was 200 pounds, probably ran a 4.8, like he wouldn't even be into camp, but for his time, he was awesome. And my Babe Ruth comparison is Babe Ruth hit more home runs than most teams in the league combined. You know what I mean? Like he hit more home runs than, I don't know what team, the Cardinals, the A's, blah, blah, blah,
right.
blah, blah. Like if someone was doing that in today's Major League Baseball, would be like, that's the greatest player of all time. But that was Jim Brown, to your point. And OJ's like this. But Jim Brown, the people blocking for him were his weight.
Yeah.
He's the biggest, fastest, strongest dude on the field. It would be like if Derrick Henry was 320 pounds and ran a 4.3.
And so the Babe Ruth debate too, and I know this is a football podcast, and we're going to talk drafts here, but there are some tie-ins in, talking about how draft prospects are treated now and how you get to where you are in today's NFL. People bring up the Babe Ruth thing, and they're like, well, Babe Ruth would just, would be he's a slow pitch softball player now, right? He couldn't catch up to the speed that everyone's pitching. Guys back then weren't throwing that hard. Right. Like there was like Walter Johnson, maybe was throwing high 80s or 90, touching 90, if anybody. But at the same time, he didn't have the nutrition, the training regimens they have now, the technology of equipment, the baseballs fly.
I would say the baseball's just like sewn together with whatever.
Yeah. So take Aaron Judge, and he has zero training, right? There's no protein shakes, like nothing, right? Whatever you are is what you are. And now here's a 45-ounce log of hickory, by the way.
Yeah, they cut off a branch from the backyard.
And go hit. And he would probably hit a lot of home runs. And maybe it looked a lot like Babe Ruth. But to say that Babe Ruth, with his talent, couldn't, in this day and age, with how big and strong he was and his hand-eye coordination, if he couldn't, with today's nutrition, today's technology, not be a good player, like, shooting up steroids like some of these. You tell me he couldn't be David Ortiz. I don't buy that either. So they're just everything is so different about it. And you talk about Jack Ham, who's 200 pounds, he would be 240 today because it's different. He'd probably be faster and bigger because everybody is, because you have the ability to make your body faster and bigger now.
I'm not a history buff, but I know a little bit. I mean, I didn't grow up under a rock. That's the only reason you can judge them against who they played against. So Napoleon's army or the Mongols or whoever were the greatest armies of all time. Well, they wouldn't beat the U.S. right now. Right. I mean, like, drop a nuke on their head. It's over. And like you only can judge against who you're fighting, who you're playing against. And I mean, I think one thing we should note, though, Babe Ruth's a perfect example. He never played against an African American, anyone from Latino, Gordie Howe didn't play against Europeans, like the world's changed,
Absolutely.
Jack Nicklaus. I mean, the golfing world wasn't half as diverse as it was now, I mean, but that's not their fault,
Right. You can only judge them with who they played against as far as historical stuff goes. And, some guys you can tell transcend. Wilt Chamberlain's a great example of that.
Yeah.
He's kind of like the Babe Ruth of the NBA, and people don't give him enough credit these days. You're like, dude, this guy was a Olympic level jumper, and he was legit 7 feet, and he was a freak of nature and strong. And he was playing in Converse. You're telling me he couldn't be a dominant big man in today's game? Give me a break.
Scored 100 points in one game. Like, did you ever see the stand up about that one? Like, coach comes to sidelines, like, who's got Wilt? I mean, like, maybe we should help that guy out who's got Wilt. He's got 98 points, and there's only 30 seconds left or something like that.
No, man.
I mean, it's a small example, and I know you know baseball better than I do, but like Bob Gibson had a historic season where he had the best ERA in baseball. But I guess, and I don't know this for a fact, I'm sure our listeners would know better. That year in that era, ERAs were very low across the board. So it's a great accomplishment, but you have to kind of take it with a grain of salt too. And it's not Babe Ruth hitting more home runs than the Tigers.
Let's talk generational, since we're talking athletes, generational prospects, questions from the mailbag about the NFL draft, and some concerning draft trends at certain positions next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. It's playoff time in the NBA and the NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. There's no football games to bet on, but there is NFL draft props at FanDuel. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose on that first bet. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. A question from Crime Dog, who is an everydayer. Appreciate all the questions from everybody. Got so many good ones here. Talking about generational prospects, and we've talked a little bit about this before, and it's happening again this year. Caleb Williams, we've seen it with Trevor Lawrence, we've seen it with Andrew Luck. John Elway back in the day was like the first guy I ever remember people talking about. And again, I don't remember the 1983 draft, but it was, he was the generational guy. He could throw a baseball over the fence from home plate, and ridiculous athlete. Generational by definition, Matt, means it's once in a generation. Yeah. So if I could remember half a dozen of them, then none of them are generational, right?
Yeah. Is a generation like 20 years? Well, what's Gen X or whatever? I don't know how long.
Generation's long enough for the kids to become parents, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe a 20-year gap or so, where you start having kids or whatever. It's a terrible thing to do to Caleb Williams or Trevor Lawrence or Luck or any young man, because we've had conversations lately. I think this is an interesting conversation on Lawrence. If Trevor Lawrence's career mirrors Matt Ryan's, was he a success or not? That's a pretty darn good career. It's a just missed Hall of Fame guy, didn't win a ring, won an MVP, consensus top 7 or 8 quarterback for much of his career, maybe higher some years,
played
never lower.
Just missed. That's a hit. That's a hit of a player. If you get a first round pick, there's Matt Ryan good at quarterback. That's a hit.
So if the Bears draft Williams and he does that exact same thing, that's a hit. But I think many Bears fans would say, I'll go Fish. I think he could be better than that. He could be Mahomes. He could be better than Mahomes. Generational. Right.
I would probably go Fish too. But then at the same time, Matt Ryan would be far and away the best quarterback in Chicago Bears history, and it's not close.
Yeah, not even close. Like they probably would have Super Bowl trophies if they had a couple of Matt Ryans over the years, with more Super Bowl trophies than the 85 Bears or whatever, So this question was asked, and they brought up Luck and they brought up Lawrence, and they also brought up Peyton Manning. And I just want to remind people, because no one remembers this, at this time in the Peyton Manning draft, Mel, me or you, if we were on the air together, would be talking every day, Leaf versus Manning. Versus Manning. Boy, Leaf's more talented, but Peyton Manning is Archie's kid. And
did you see
nobody thought Peyton?
Did you see the throws at Leafs pro day? Mel Kiper always talked about how Peyton Manning had one of the worst pro days. Ball's kind of fluttering around. And he just, he wasn't as talented physically, and he was a big time prospect, and he went #1, and everyone knew about him for a long time at Tennessee. His dad was Archie Manning, but it wasn't a slam dunk pick, and he wasn't even looked at as a generational prospect then, like people were talking about later. And Andrew Luck is in my opinion, and I'm annoyed and frustrated by how his career went, because he should still be playing.
Exactly.
He went to a different team with a better GM that wasn't drafting Philip Dorsett and was drafting offensive linemen to protect the stinking guy. He might have hit that generational mark, right? But he went to a bad spot, and he was like, his career got ruined. That's a what if that's going to frustrate me, because Andrew Luck in my lifetime that I remember was the best prospect I saw coming out, because he had everything. It's probably what it was like for John Elway. He wasn't quite the athlete John Elway was, but he was just
Elway got that too. Yeah,
and
right.
smart and had a great arm, and he just had everything you could imagine.
Yes, and I remember the day Luck retiring, doing a podcast saying, I think he's like the third best quarterback in the league right now. I mean, I think he was hitting his peak at the time that he retired too. But the term generational is wrong. And that's why I wanted to bring up Manning, because there's a lot of revisionist history there. Because frankly, if the Colts would have turned in the card, the Colts select Ryan Leaf from Washington State, Mel and everybody would have said, hi, okay. No one in the world would have been shocked. So that's not a generational talent. You know what I mean? And I didn't plan on having Babe Ruth, Bob Gibson conversations or Juice and all that. But to me, a generational talent, you see them in other sports more than you do the NFL. Like, trust me, from my hockey background, the Penguins were very lucky to get Mario Lemieux and Sidney Crosby, that you could pull any 10 drafts. They're definitely the first pick in the draft. Connor McDavid was that guy for the Oilers. LeBron James is like the best example ever. Like my sister that's never gone to a game would be like, I'm taking him first. Like it's the easiest scouting job in the world. That's a generational talent.
You knew it in high school.
I mean, he was drafted as an 18-year-old.
Lemieux
was like that. I mean, like, yeah.
We're talking about Caleb Williams, the potential Bears #1 overall pick. Here's a question from Burner Stillers on Twitter. He says, Bears should take Marvin at 1 and trade up from 9 to get May or Daniels. What do you think about that for the Chicago Bears throwing the draft on its ear?
Okay, I'll answer it one question, but it's funny you mentioned Marvin, because I wanted to say this before. I think Marvin's close to a generational talent. That doesn't mean he's going to go first, because this league is different than the NBA and whatnot. I mean, I think Calvin Johnson was pretty generational talent. I think, you know what I mean?
Is Marvin Harrison Jr. a better wide receiver prospect than Caleb Williams is a quarterback prospect?
I don't think it's even close.
Okay.
I mean, if you're just putting a grade on them, he would be the highest grade. Like, that doesn't mean you should go first. I mean, and that's leads to this conversation. Like, Myles Garrett might be a generational edge prospect coming out of school. I mean, there's been others, at least in his neighborhood, so it doesn't exactly hold up, but as good as you'll ever see. You know what I mean? And I think Marvin's that guy.
If you're the Bears, though, I got no problem with flipping it and drafting Caleb Williams #1 and calling everybody and seeing if you can get up a couple spots, 5 spots. Maybe nobody's calling the Cardinals about a quarterback at 4, and everyone wanted the top 3 quarterbacks and they're gone. Maybe you can even get from 9 to 4 and get Marvin 2 and get Marvin and Caleb rather than Marvin at 1 and then coming back up for Drake May or Jaden Daniels.
The answer to the question is you take the quarterback or do like what you implied, because quarterback is so much more important. Like, if goalies in hockey were double as important as scorers, you take the goalie, of course, and they're scarce. I mean, if there's, I don't know the other sport. I mean, if starting pitching is so unbelievably scarce, you take the starting pitching or whatever it is.
And it happens a lot. You just draft a million arms and you hope that some of them, some of them are going to need Tommy John. Some of them are going to flame out. Some of them never develop secondary pitches. Some of them you can't throw a strike. And then you hope one of the guys, when you draft 20 arms, hopefully one of them hits.
But unlike quarterback, that guy still only plays 1 out of 4 or 5 days. Like the quarterback's taking every snap, hopefully every game, as you win Super Bowl after Super Bowl. So it's even more so. If the Bears didn't trade for Keenan Allen too, I think this would make a little more sense. Like, wide receiver is not even a need for him. It'd be nice, but it's not even a huge need for them.
Yeah. I think there's probably a better chance that the Bears actually go down than go up from pick number 9.
They don't have a second round pick. I mean, that being said, if Roma Dunze's there, you take him at 9 because he's.
It sets up well for them. They can sit there if they like the guy. They don't. They can field calls, or get the best defensive player in the draft.
And if he's gone, I would go down to 17 and draft an edge or whatever.
Wide receiver, offensive line, best defensive player in the draft. Trading down, you could go up a couple spots too. Who knows?
Yeah.
Jerry asked this question. Speaking of wide receivers, would you rather start 3 Tank Dells or 3 George Pickenses?
Who do you think's a better football player today? I asked you because it's a Steeler involved, and I don't want to be partial.
But. Yeah. Well, Tank Dell's injured currently. The answer to me is easy. I would go 3 George Pickens.
Me too.
Yeah.
I couldn't live with myself running around with 3 Tank Dells.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, we just saw how he got hurt too. There's certain things you probably shouldn't be doing with him. And George Pickens maybe doesn't run the greatest entire route tree, but when he's motivated, he'll block. You find out which 2 of the 3 George Pickens is the most motivated, and you put them in the game, and then have a tight end and have the third sitting out. But yeah, big plays down the field, and he can break off some other routes too. And he's not just a completely one-dimensional player. I think that's an easy one for me.
I asked you that question because I think there's a case that Tank Dell's a better football player than Pickens. Like in a nutshell, if you were drafting one of them with the 10th overall pick in this draft, which one would you spend your pick on? I could see a case for both. I can't see a case for putting 3 tiny people out there all at once. I just can't do it.
Right.
One's fine.
It's not ideal though to have like a bunch of true X outside.
No.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, neither is far from ideal. I mean,
right.
Of course. I mean, who's your slot? You want to build a basketball team to some degree,
All right, next, let's talk some concerning trends, positional trends in the NFL draft. Next. This episode of Peacock and Williamson is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's the formula for winning championships, just like it's what keeps your ride or die alive. At eBay Motors, everything you need to maintain your vehicle is on tap, and you can level it all up to peak performance. They got superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights. Maybe you just need some wiper blades. Maybe you just need some new rims for your vehicle. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die. You'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. All right, we get a question here about Alabama offensive linemen. Alabama dominates because they got a lot of big people. They got 5 stars behind 5 stars on their offensive lines. But this question from Michael, and he references a tweet from Matt Miller of ESPN at NFL Draft Scout on Twitter. And basically, scout the player versus scouting the helmet, and how you address certain players, certain positions, and how things come together and turn out with certain positions. And when you look at the offensive linemen from Alabama, Tyler Steen last year, Evan Neal, Alex Leatherwood, Jedrick Wills, Jonah Williams, Cam Robinson, Austin Shepard. You go, remember big old DJ Fluker, right? Andre Smith back in the day. You go through the list, you got a lot of guys that were probably somewhat disappointing versus their draft slot, Matt. What do you make of that? And is J.C. Latham the next in this draft as a first-round offensive tackle?
It's a very disappointing list. When you're considering draft position, a lot of those guys are first-round picks. Some of them aren't bad players, Jonah Williams, Wills with the Browns, etc. But as a hit rate, it's pretty bad. I think it's a really interesting conversation, and it's not one I can answer, to be honest with you, but maybe an O-line coach could, or an area scout that goes into Alabama year after year. I mean, is there a trend with all these guys? Did they get beat up at practice more than most, and their bodies are falling apart, and they're having a hard enough time competing for playing time?
That's
they
flat
out,
Yeah, that's a big one that comes up a lot with Alabama, because Nick Saban's not trying to win somebody else future NFL games. He's trying to win current college football games.
Yep.
And what he has is big time 5-star recruits, the biggest, baddest dudes that he could find at the age of 17 to come into his program and win games for a few years. And that's what he cares about. And he overlooks some off the field stuff, and these guys come out injured sometimes, more so than other programs potentially. Mm-hmm. And I think it's all of those things together in one. Do you remember, Andre Smith was the one, because we're going back to the 2009 draft. Andre Smith was the one that had like awful workouts, and his like just bodies
flopping all over the place. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Like, geez, does this guy ever work out like in his life? But he's
Right.
big and athletic, and he was born that way. But yeah, and he kind of came into the league and was like, yeah, he's probably not going to work all that hard, but he was bigger than everybody at the college level. So that part didn't matter. It starts to show yourself when you do become a professional. Reuben Foster at linebacker is a great example of that.
Sure.
He got some weird off the field stuff, and he's like, he seems like a good kid. He's nice enough. And then all of a sudden you get unsupervised for a while. Boom, he's off the team.
Yeah. So offensive line related, I have two other theories that I have no clue if they're true or not, but it is a trend. Offensive line is so technique driven. I mean, I say this all the time. My second hire would be an offensive line coach, the best one I could afford. And is there some technique at Bama that they're teaching that is terrible or prohibitive for the pros or helps Bama win but doesn't help you beat the Eagles or Lions? Is there some technique that these kids learn and can't unlearn and have the same bad habit over and over? And then my other thought is, one thing I very, very much believe is if you have the prerequisite athleticism, which all these guys do at Bama, that's not a problem. But more importantly, you're one, tough, and you're two, smart, you're going to make it in the NFL. I mean, as an offensive lineman, I mean, that is a big scouting thing, that if you're tough and smart and you're over the line athletically, you're hard to get off the field and you're going to make it. I mean, unless your knee falls apart or whatever. Now, I think Bama dudes are tough. Do we know they're smart? I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe collectively.
You're not saying they're dumb. It's just like what is prioritized
what's missing
to win at that level. And when you start to look at the list and you look at JC Latham's right in that as far as how they win and what style of player they are, who was one of the better players from the list we just mentioned? Jonah Williams. He was smaller, lighter, more technique-driven player. The rest of the guys on that list were all at or above like weight and size. Like big guys. Alabama walks in, they are bigger than you, and they're going to push you around. And you can win that way in the college level, but without the technique and the other things, it gets more difficult in the NFL level, because guess what? Now the other guys are bigger on the other side to compete with the size. And you look at there's a lot of 330 plus pound guys I just listed off.
So, they're not going to take the kid that's he's a little short, he's a little slow. They're not going to take him. Never.
How about this trend with cornerbacks? Should we stop looking for shutdown corners? Should we stop drafting first-round corners altogether, Matt? Because, as Josh mentions here, in 2020, there were 5 corners taken in the first round. Jeff Okudah, C.J. Henderson, A.J. Terrell, Noah Igbenogany, and Jeff Gladney. One of them is a really good player for the Atlanta Falcons, and A.J. Terrell. The other 4 are not only not good, they're disastrous draft picks for their teams, and some of them are out of the league just about.
I would say that's more just a bad year, to be honest with you. I mean, I think that's one isolated incident. I mean, I just pulled it up on draft history. I mean, the first rounders last year were Witherspoon, Forbes, Gonzalez, Banks. I mean, Forbes looks like a problem, but I don't see that class immediately as, boy, that stinks.
Right. I think there's some good and some bad there.
Yeah.
The next draft, 2021, you got a superstar in Surtain. I think JC Horn is a good player. Injuries have kind of kept him from being the guy he should be, but it's not a talent problem at all there with him. I can't remember what the other corners were in that class, if they're even worried.
Caleb Farley's a terrible example too. Newsome was good.
Yeah.
Stokes is okay for the Packers. He's getting better. Just looking at now. And then the year after that is the Sauce year. Sauce, Stingley, McDuffie. I mean, they're all happy with their picks.
Great year. Yeah, that was a great year for corners. I think forcing it, I mean, Noah Igbenogany, Jeff Gladney, you just need a corner. And you're like, gosh, I hope this guy is a good, like what you're hoping, right? CJ Henderson, it was off. Like CJ Henderson could cover like nobody's business, but they couldn't get him to go to practice. He was in bed. People are calling him like, hey, you're going to come to practice? Like, my God.
I mean, Arnett was terrible from that class too.
Oh, was that in the same class, 2020?
Yeah, I'm just pulling that up. That's even worse than we thought. Right.
Listen, yeah. What an awful year. I mean, that was just a bad year.
I mean, Terrell was a hit. Everyone else was terrible.
But you could really see, looking back, there's a really good reason why the misses were misses there. And so maybe that's the lesson. Don't try to force corner.
Exactly.
If a legit dude is there, draft him. If not, don't force that position. Find a football player later.
Now, what's interesting too is the second round, Trayvon Diggs, Jalen Johnson, those guys have been home runs. And then the safeties drafted there too were Kyle Duggar, McKinney, Winfield, Delpit. I mean, they're some of the best in the league. So it was a really good defensive back draft. Just the top stunk.
Don't chase traits at corner then.
Don't chase.
Don't chase. So you got to have a football player. And if the football player doesn't match the traits, you can't take him in the first round. And if there's traits, but no football player, don't draft him in the first round. So basically, slam dunk corners the one you should be drafting. I think Okuda is kind of the guy that you would say was a good prospect that still just didn't work out.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, but I remember when the Dolphins took Noah, I was like, that's a 4th round pick that they're taking.
Yeah, that one, that was immediately forced. Gladney had off-field stuff before and then continued to have that. Arnett wasn't a first-round athlete. And then there was off-field on top of that, I think, right?
I think he had off-field stuff, right?
And so, yeah, I think
I don't think there's a trend there. I think the Bama O-line, the tackle thing is more of a trend than not drafting corners a first-round trend.
There might be more of a trend at wide receiver, which I think might need to be a part of the next mailbag because
athletes.
Yeah, athletes missing on athletes, how good the second-round wide receivers are, who the best wide receivers are in the NFL, and who's getting paid there. I think we got to have a wide receiver conversation, Matt, and there's a ton of good wide receivers, and maybe see how that applies to the 2020 NFL draft on a future episode of Peacock and Williamson. Thanks for all the questions. Always great ones. Appreciate all the everydayers out there. Apologies to the questions we did not get to. Make sure you are subscribed. YouTube, everywhere you get your podcast. Peacock and Williamson daily. Back tomorrow, right here. Peacock and Williamson.